The corridor outside the war chamber smelled of cedar smoke and old stone. Soraya pressed her back against the wall, her fingers curled around the bundle of dried calendula she had brought from the healer's wing. She had not meant to stop here. She had been on her way to deliver the herbs to the kitchen, where the cooks would steep them into the tea that settled the alpha's stomach before council meetings. A small thing, a quiet act of care that no one would ever trace back to her. That was the nature of their love. Invisible, conducted in stolen hours and whispered oaths, hidden from a court that would never accept a bonded union between the Alpha of Cathara and a woman with no bloodline, no title, and no pack to call her own. But Soraya had never minded the secrecy. Not truly. Because in the darkness of his chamber, with his arms wrapped around her and his breath warm against her temple, Ronan had made her believe it was temporary. "One more season," he had said, tracing the curve of her jaw with his thumb. "Let me secure the Eastern Alliance. Let me bring the border pacts to heel. And then I will stand before the court and tell them what you are to me." That had been 8 months ago. 8 months of slipping through servants' passages and entering his rooms through the hidden door behind the tapestry. 8 months of watching him sit at the head of the great table, while she stood in the shadows with the healers, close enough to touch and forbidden to reach for him. And now she carried something that could not wait for politics. Soraya's free hand drifted to her lower belly. 9 weeks. Perhaps 10. She had confirmed it herself 3 days ago with the old blood root test that her mother had taught her before the fever took her. The root had turned crimson in the water. She had practiced the words every night since, had rehearsed them in the mirror of her tiny chamber until they felt natural instead of terrifying. Tonight, she had decided. After the council session, when Ronan came to her as he always did, she would take his hand and press it to her stomach and say the words that would change everything. But first, the tea. She was 2 steps from the war chamber door when she heard the voices. Ronan's, deep and familiar, carrying through the gap where the heavy oak door had been left slightly ajar. And another, Lord Calum, his chief advisor, whose oily tone Soraya had learned to despise. "The noble houses are losing patience, my king." Calum's voice was a blade sheathed in silk. "3 of the 5 bloodline families have submitted formal proposals. Daughters of impeccable lineage, each one capable of producing heirs of pure descent. You cannot delay the selection indefinitely." "I am aware of the pressure, Calum." "Then you are also aware that whispers have begun. The servants talk. The guards notice things. A healer with no family who somehow commands the Alpha's attention. A door behind a tapestry that is used far more frequently than any secret passage should be. Silence. Heavy, dangerous silence. Soraya's blood turned to ice. "There is nothing to notice," Ronan said. His voice was flat, controlled. The voice of a king managing a problem. "My lord, I am not here to judge your diversions. Every alpha has them. But this particular diversion has become visible, and visibility creates vulnerability. If the bloodline families discover that you have been betting a pack less healer while refusing their daughters..." "Enough." The word cracked through the air like a whip. Soraya flinched against the wall. Another silence. Then Ronan spoke again, and the words that left his mouth carved themselves into Soraya's chest like a blade dipped in poison. "Soraya is not a complication. She is a comfort. When I am ready to choose a proper mate, I will do so, and she will understand. She has always understood her place." Soraya's hand tightened on the bundle of calendula until the dried flowers crumbled between her fingers. Her place. "And if she does not accept it quietly?" Calum pressed. Ronan laughed. The sound was casual, dismissive, the laugh of a man discussing an inconvenience, not a lover. "She will forgive me. She always does." 6 words. 6 words. Spoken with the easy confidence of a man who had never once considered that forgiveness had a limit. That the quiet woman who warmed his bed and healed his wounds and kept his secrets might one day decide that her patience was not infinite. She will forgive me. She always does. Soraya's vision blurred. The corridor tilted beneath her feet. She pressed her hand harder against her belly, as if she could shield the life inside her from the truth that was splitting her apart. He had never intended to claim her. Every whispered promise, every oath spoken in the dark, every time he had kissed the hollow of her throat and murmured that she was his, only his, always his. It had been the indulgence of a king who knew his plaything would never demand more than he was willing to give. Because she always forgave him. When he canceled their stolen evenings for council meetings that ran long, when he danced with daughters of noble houses at feasts while she watched from behind the serving tables, when months stretched into seasons and his promise of soon never became now, and he had mistaken her love for weakness. The bundle of calendula fell from her fingers, scattering petals across the stone floor. Soraya stared at them for a long moment, tiny golden fragments of something that had been whole seconds ago. Then she turned and walked away. She packed a leather satchel with the precision of someone who had already made a decision she did not yet fully understand. 2 changes of clothing, her mother's silver ring, the pouch of coins she had saved from her healer's wages. Not much, but enough. The dried herbs she would need for the nausea that struck every morning like a fist. She would not be a comfort. She would not be a diversion. She would not wait in the shadows for a man who saw her forgiveness as a guarantee, rather than a gift. Soraya paused at her door and looked back at the narrow bed where Ronan had held her just last night, where he had pressed his lips to her hair and whispered words of devotion that she now understood were the practiced lines of a man who believed his audience would never leave the theater. She placed her hand on her belly one final time. "You will never wait for someone who makes you a secret," she whispered to the life inside her. "I promise you that." Then she stepped into the corridor, pulled her hood over her dark hair, and walked toward the eastern gate, the one used by traders and delivery carts, the one where the guards were laziest in the hour before dawn. No one stopped her. No one even noticed. And by the time the first light of morning touched the spires of Cathara's great hall, Soraya was 3 miles into the Ashwood forest, moving south with the steady, unhurried pace of a woman who was never coming back. She did not hear the knock on her chamber door 2 hours later. She did not hear Ronan's voice calling her name. First casual, then confused, then sharp with the first edge of something he had never felt before. And she did not see the look on his face when he opened the door and found the room stripped bare, with nothing remaining but a handful of crushed calendula petals scattered across the floor like golden tears. 4 months had a way of reshaping a person. The village of Brindal sat in the crook of a river valley 60 miles south of the Catharan border, a place so small it appeared on no official maps and answered to no noble house. It survived on goat herding, barley farming, and a stubborn refusal to involve itself in the politics of wolves. It was, in other words, the perfect place to disappear. Soraya had arrived in the dead of winter, half frozen and barely showing, with a story about a dead husband and a need to start over. The village elder, a weathered woman named Brecca, had looked at her swollen eyes and calloused healer's hands and asked no further questions. "The old midwife's cottage is empty," Brecca had said. "Roof leaks in 2 places. Stove works if you kick it. You fix people, you eat. That is the arrangement." Soraya had accepted. Now spring was softening the valley, and the woman called Nella, the name she had chosen for its plainness, its inability to catch attention, had become a quiet fixture of Brindle life. She delivered babies. She stitched wounds from farming accidents. She brewed willow bark tea for the elderly and peppermint tinctures for colicky infants. The village had absorbed her the way small communities absorb useful strangers, with cautious gratitude and very few questions. But at night, when the cottage was dark and the fire had burned low, Soraya lay with her hands on her swelling belly and fought the war that never ended. The child moved constantly now, strong, insistent movements that pressed against her palms as if demanding acknowledgement. Sometimes she felt kicks from two distinct locations at once, as though two small bodies were competing for space, and the village midwife had begun suggesting she should prepare for the possibility of twins. Soraya tried not to think about what twins of an alpha bloodline might mean. Instead, she thought about the words. She will forgive me? She always does. 4 months, and the sentence had not lost a single degree of its heat. It burned in her chest every morning when she woke. It sat behind her ribs during every patient visit, every meal, and every quiet moment when her guard slipped and the memories rushed in. Not the cruel memories. That was the worst part. If Ronan had been consistently terrible, she could have built a wall of righteous anger and sheltered behind it. But the memories that ambushed her were the tender ones. His hands cupping her face after she had spent 14 hours treating wounded soldiers from a border skirmish. The way his voice dropped to a near whisper when he said her name, as if it were something sacred. The night he had found her crying over a patient she had lost, a child with river fever, and had held her without speaking for an hour, his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. Those memories were the poison, because they made her doubt. They made her wonder if she had heard wrong, if she had misunderstood, if perhaps the words had been a performance for Calum and not a reflection of what Ronan truly felt. But then she would remember the ease in his voice, the casual certainty, the laugh. A man who loved her as an equal would never have spoken those words. A man who respected her would never have been so confident in her compliance. He had revealed himself in that unguarded moment, and no amount of tender memories could erase what she had heard with her own ears. Soraya pressed her face into her pillow and breathed until the ache subsided enough to function. Strong. She had to be strong. For the child. For the children. For herself. It was a market day in late spring when the first sign of trouble arrived. Soraya was examining a goatherd's infected hand in her cottage when young Daveth, the baker's son, came sprinting down the lane with his face flushed and his eyes wide. Northern traders were asking questions about a dark-haired healer who might have passed through during winter. They say that Alpha is looking for her. They say he has gone half mad, that the crops have withered, that wolves have turned feral. They say the land itself is sick because the Alpha is sick. The land reflecting the Alpha's state was not a myth. Among wolf kind, the bond between an Alpha and his territory was deep and primal. Idle gossip, she said firmly. The affairs of kings are nothing to us. After the boy left, Soraya sat alone and stared at the far wall. He was searching for her. Not out of love. A man who called her a comfort did not tear his kingdom apart over a missing comfort. You replaced comforts. You found new ones. Unless it was about possession, about pride, about the Alpha King's inability to accept that something he considered his had dared to leave without permission. She would not be found. She would not be retrieved. She should have moved faster. 3 days after the traders left, the wolves came. Soraya noticed them at dusk. She was hanging freshly washed linens behind her cottage when a prickle ran across the back of her neck, the instinct of prey recognizing a predator's gaze. She turned slowly, her wet hands dripping onto the grass. At the edge of the forest, 3 shapes stood motionless, dark brown, almost black, their eyes reflecting the dying light with an amber gleam that no natural wolf possessed. Shifted wolves, watching her. Soraya's pulse spiked, but she kept her movements slow as she gathered the linens and walked back inside. She bolted the door, checked the window shutters. They did not approach that night, but the next morning, massive paw prints circled her cottage in a precise perimeter. Whatever wolves had come to Brindal, they had spent the night mapping her home. She was still examining the tracks when a voice called from the lane. Nella. Elder Brecca stood at the gate, her weathered face creased with concern. Beside her was a man Soraya had never seen before. He was tall and lean, with close-cropped gray hair and a stillness about him that marked him as someone accustomed to violence. His eyes were pale green, sharp as broken glass, and they swept over Soraya with the clinical assessment of a soldier evaluating a target. This man arrived at dawn, Brecca said carefully. He says he has business with you. My name is Corvin. The man's voice was low and measured. I serve the Alpha of Cathara. I have been searching for you for quite some time, my lady. I am no one's lady, Soraya said. My name is Nella. I am a healer. I think you have made a mistake. Corvin's expression did not change. You are Soraya, formerly of the healing wing of Cathara's great hall. You carry the Alpha's child, and you are in considerably more danger than you realize. Brecca's eyes widened. Soraya felt the careful architecture of her false life crack along every seam. Elder Brecca, Soraya said quietly. Would you give us a moment? The old woman hesitated, then retreated down the lane with several backward glances. Soraya turned to Corvin. You should not have come here. I agree. But the alternative was allowing you to die without warning, and my conscience would not permit it, Corvin explained. House Moraven, the most powerful of the 5 bloodline families, had positioned Valeria as the presumptive queen. She had convinced 3 noble houses that the Alpha's instability was an enchantment placed by a rogue healer. She has sent a hunting party. 6 of her best wolves, and a woman named Daisha, who has a particular reputation for making problems disappear quietly. They will reach this village by tomorrow nightfall. Why are you telling me this? You serve Ronan. Something cracked in Corvin's expression. Because I was there the morning he found your room empty. 3 of us tried to restrain him and we barely managed it. He broke Fenwick's collarbone. He put his fist through a stone wall. And then he stood in your chamber, holding a handful of crushed flowers, and made a sound I have heard only once before, from a wolf who watched its mate die. He should have thought about that before he called me a comfort to be discarded. A comfort? My lady, the man I left in Cathara is destroying himself. He has not slept more than fragments in 4 months. He has dismissed Calum. He has refused every candidate so violently that the last envoy left with a broken jaw. There is no bond, Soraya cut in. He never claimed me, never marked me. I was his secret, Corvin. And when I heard him say those words, she will forgive me, she always does, I understood exactly what I was. He said that? I heard every syllable. Then my king is a fool. A monumental fool who spoke the most catastrophic words of his life, while the one person who mattered was listening. He paused. But my lady, foolishness and indifference are not the same thing. What he said was arrogant and wrong. But what he has become since you left is a man who has realized, too late, that the woman he took for granted was the only thing holding him together. That is not my problem to solve. No, it is not. But the Moravian assassins coming to kill you and your unborn children, that is a problem we must solve together. And quickly. As if summoned by his words, a howl rose from the western ridge. Low, sustained, and answered by 2 more from different positions. They were closer than tomorrow nightfall. Corvin's hand moved to the blade at his hip. How many exits does this cottage have? 2 doors, 3 windows. Is there anywhere in this village you can be hidden? If they have my scent, hiding will not help. They have your scent. They have had it since the traders passed through. The traders were Moravian plants. I should have reached you sooner. Another howl, closer now. Soraya could feel something stirring in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with fear. The babies were restless, their movements sharp and agitated, as if they could sense the danger closing in. Corvin! How many wolves did you bring? Myself and 2 others. We traveled light to avoid detection. 3 wolves against 6, plus an assassin. The odds are terrible, which is why I sent word to the king 2 days ago. Corvin met her eyes. He is coming, Soraya. Whether you want him to or not, Ronan is already on his way. The question is whether we can keep you alive until he arrives. She looked at the herbs lining her shelves. Remedies that could heal, but also compounds that could burn, blind, and choke. She was a healer. She had always been a healer, but she was also a mother, and the wolves outside her door were coming for her children. Then we had better prepare, Soraya said, and reached for her knives. The first attack came not at nightfall, but in the amber light of late afternoon. Soraya had turned her cottage into something between a field hospital and a fortress. Clay pots of powdered ghost root lined the windowsills, a compound that, when shattered, could blind a shifted wolf for several agonizing minutes. A paste of concentrated nightshade and iron filings coated the door frames. Corvin had positioned his 2 wolves, a broad-shouldered male named Haddon and a wiry female named Pell, at the northern and southern approaches. He himself stood at the front gate, blade drawn. When they come, they will come fast. Moravian wolves are highland hunters. They drive prey toward a kill zone. Do not run. You will not outpace a shifted wolf at 7 months pregnant. The attack started with screams from the village. 4 wolves had gone for the villagers. A diversion. The other 2 and the assassin would circle toward Soraya while the defenders were drawn out. Go, she told Corvin. Take Haddon. Leave Pell at the back door. Corvin shifted mid-stride into a lean gray wolf that surged toward the village with Haddon's brown form close behind. Soraya was alone. She pressed her back against the wall beside the window and listened. The screams from the village continued, but they were moving away. Corvin and Haddon were driving the attackers back. But that meant the real threat was approaching from the other direction. The silence around her cottage became absolute. No insects. No wind. Even the goats in the neighboring paddock had gone mute, frozen by the proximity of apex predators. Soraya gripped the clay pots and waited. The first wolf came through the back window. It happened so fast that Soraya's mind barely registered the sequence. A massive black shape, easily 200 pounds, exploded through the shutters in a shower of wood and glass. Pell's snarl erupted from outside, followed by the horrible wet sound of wolves colliding. A second shape followed the first through the ruined window. This one was smaller, leaner, with russet fur and intelligent amber eyes that locked onto Soraya with predatory focus. It landed on her table, scattering herbs and instruments, and launched itself at her. She smashed the first clay pot directly into its face. The ghost root powder detonated in acrid white dust. The wolf shrieked, blinded, twisting sideways, claws raking the wall inches from her shoulder. She grabbed her iron pestle and brought it down on the wolf's skull with every ounce of strength she possessed. Through the back window, she could hear Pell fighting the larger wolf. The sounds were savage, snarls, the crack of jaws, the thud of heavy bodies striking earth. Then a yelp of pain, sharp and cut short. Then silence. Soraya's heart hammered. Pell? No answer. A shadow filled the ruined window frame. Not a wolf. A woman. She was tall, dressed in dark leather, black hair pulled back from a face that was beautiful, in the way a blade was beautiful, all edges and cold precision. A curved bow in one hand, a poisoned arrow in the other. You must be the famous Soraya. Her voice was soft, almost pleasant, the voice of someone who had learned that calm was more terrifying than shouting. My name is Dacia. Valeria Moravin sends her regards. If you know who I am, then you know whose children I carry. I do. That is precisely why they cannot be allowed to live. An alpha's heirs, born outside the bloodline houses, Valeria would never hold the throne. You understand, I hope. It is not personal. You are here to murder a pregnant woman and her unborn children. It does not get more personal than that. Daisha shrugged with a delicacy that made Soraya's stomach turn. I have killed mothers before. The trick is speed. She raised the bow. Soraya hurled the ghost root, but the assassin sidestepped it with fluid ease. Clever. But you only had 2 of those, and now you have none. The poisoned arrow aligned with Soraya's chest. Daisha's fingers drew the string back with practiced steadiness, and something inside Soraya broke open. It came from the place beneath her heart where 2 small lives were growing. The place where her body had been building something extraordinary for 7 months without her understanding what it was. The power erupted from her palms like sunrise, not the gentle warmth she used for healing. This was white-hot, blinding, a radiance that poured from her hands with the force of a river breaking through a dam. It struck Daisha full in the chest and flung the assassin backward through the window. The bow shattered. Daisha's body hit the oak tree outside with a crack that Soraya felt in her own bones. The light blazed from every pore of Soraya's skin, filling the ruined cottage with brilliance that burned away the shadows. Then the pain came. Soraya crumpled to her knees as the energy drained from her in a devastating rush. Her vision darkened at the edges. Her hands, still faintly glowing, pressed against the floor as her arms trembled with the effort of not collapsing entirely. Too much. She had given too much, too fast. The babies were still. Terrifyingly still. No, she gasped, her hands flying to her belly. No, please, move. Please move. A kick. Faint, but there. Then another from the opposite side. Soraya sobbed with relief, curling protectively around her stomach on the floor of her destroyed home. Outside, she heard movement. A groan. Dacia, pulling herself from the base of the shattered oak. Wounded but alive. Coming back. Soraya had nothing left. The power was spent. Her body was empty. She could not stand, could not fight, and could not even crawl toward the knife that lay 6 feet away on the kitchen floor. Footsteps crunched on broken glass. Dacia's silhouette filled the window frame again, one arm hanging limp, her face streaked with blood, but the curved knife in her functioning hand catching the last light of day. That was a mistake, Dacia said through gritted teeth. She climbed through the window, and the wall of the cottage disintegrated inward as something colossal smashed through it. Not through the door, not through the window, through the solid stone wall itself, as if it were made of paper. A wolf the color of deep bronze, massive beyond reason, eyes blazing like molten copper, filled the ruined room with its bulk. It moved with a speed that should have been impossible for something so large. 1 stride, 2, and its jaws closed around Dacia with a force that lifted the assassin off her feet. The sound Dacia made was brief. Then those burning copper eyes found Soraya on the floor. She knew those eyes. She had looked into them across candlelit chambers, had watched them soften when they found her in a crowded room. Slowly, carefully, as if terrified of frightening her, the great bronze wolf lowered its head and pressed its nose to her belly. Both babies kicked. Hard, simultaneously. The wolf made a sound, not a growl, not a whimper. Something that carried the weight of 4 months of searching, 4 months of sleepless anguish, 4 months of a bond screaming through the void for the other half that had vanished. Soraya's hand rose, trembling, and her fingers touched the coarse fur between the wolf's ears. You found me, she whispered. Fur receded, bones reformed. And then Ronan knelt beside her, his hands hovering over her stomach, his face streaked with tears. Twins? He breathed. And despite everything, despite the arrogance and the broken promises and the 6 words that had shattered her world, Soraya felt something crack inside her chest. Not forgiveness, not yet, perhaps not ever, but something. Soraya did not let him hold her. When Ronan reached for her, his hands shaking, she caught his wrists and pushed them back. The movement was gentle but absolute, and she watched something fracture behind his eyes when he understood what it meant. "You are hurt," he said. His voice was raw, scraped down to nothing. "I am depleted, not broken. There is a difference. Help me stand, then we need to talk." Corvin appeared in the gap where the wall had been. "The village is secured. 2 Moravan wolves dead, 2 fled. Haddon took a bad bite to the shoulder. Pell is alive, but will not be fighting again soon." They could not stay. Reinforcements would come. Ronan wanted Cathara. No. The word fell between them like a dropped blade. Ronan stared at her. "Cathara is the place where I was your secret for 8 months. Where I entered through hidden doors and left before the servants woke. Where I was your comfort." She let the word land with its full weight. "I will not go back there to be hidden again." Ronan flinched. "That is not what I am asking." "Then what are you asking, Ronan? Because the last time I stood outside your war chamber, I heard exactly what you thought of me. I heard how certain you were that I would absorb whatever you decided to do and come back smiling. So tell me, what has changed?" The silence that followed was excruciating. Corvin had the good sense to withdraw, pulling back through the ruined wall to give them space. The night closed in around the shattered cottage, carrying the distant sound of villagers emerging from their hiding places. Ronan stood before her, and for the first time since she had known him, the Alpha King of Cathara looked small. "I do not have an excuse, Soraya. I said those words because I believed them, because I was so secure in your devotion that I treated it as a permanent fixture rather than a gift that could be withdrawn." He took a shuddering breath. "I told Calum you were a comfort because that was simpler than admitting the truth. That I was terrified. That I had found my true mate in a woman the court would never accept. And rather than fighting for you openly, I kept delaying. One more season, one more excuse. Because I was a coward. And the worst part is that I was right. You did always forgive me. Every broken promise. Every night I chose political convenience over you. And instead of recognizing that forgiveness as the extraordinary act of love it was, I assumed it was inexhaustible." He looked at her belly, and his expression shattered. "And you were going to tell me about the children, that night. You were coming to take care of me, and instead, you heard me reduce everything you are to a convenient afterthought." Soraya's vision blurred. She blinked the moisture away savagely. She would not cry in front of him. Not now. Not when the anger was the only scaffolding holding her upright. "You did not just reduce me, Ronan. You erased me. In that one sentence you told me exactly how this story ended. I would forgive you again. You would choose a proper mate. And I would be expected to retreat gracefully into whatever corner you assigned me, grateful for the scraps of affection you tossed my way when the court was not watching. That was never. That was exactly what was going to happen. You know it. I know it. The only difference is that I had the dignity to leave before I had to watch it unfold." Ronan's mouth opened, then closed. He looked away, and she saw his throat working, fighting for control. "You are right," he said finally. "You are right, and I deserve every word of that. I was going to choose someone else. Not because I loved anyone else. I never have, Soraya. Not before you and not since. But because it was easier. Because the political cost of claiming a packless healer felt too high, and I convinced myself that I could have both. The throne and you. A public queen and a private love." His voice dropped to barely a whisper. "There is no throne without you. There is no kingdom without you. The land is dying because I am dying, Soraya. Every day you were gone, the bond tore at something deeper than flesh. The crops rot because I rot. The wolves go feral because something in me has gone feral. You were never my comfort. You were my foundation. And I was too arrogant to say it aloud until you were gone and the whole world collapsed." Soraya stood in the ruins of her cottage, in the ruins of the life she had built from nothing, and felt the war inside her rage with terrible intensity. Part of her wanted to shatter, to fall into his arms and let the bond that still hummed between them, diminished, damaged, but never fully severed, pull them back together. But the larger part of her, the part that had walked 3 miles through a frozen forest with his children growing inside her, the part that had rebuilt herself from ashes, that part held firm. Words are easy, Ronan. You have always been skilled with words in the dark, in private. You have never once spoken for me in the light. Then let me start now. Come to Cathara. Not through the hidden door. Through the front gate. Beside me. I am not your mate. You never claimed me. In the eyes of Wolflaw, I am nothing to you. Then come to Cathara and let me make you everything. In the light. Because our children deserve a father who fights for their mother instead of hiding her. She looked at her belly, where 2 small lives pressed against her palms. For them, she said at last, I am coming for them, not for you. That is enough. For now, that is enough. They rode through the night, Soraya in front of Ronan on his warhorse because Corvin insisted it was the safest configuration, and because her body, still drained from the power she had unleashed, could not hold itself upright in a saddle alone. She kept her spine rigid, maintaining a thin blade of distance between her back and his chest, refusing to lean into the warmth her exhausted body craved. Ronan did not push. His arm circled her waist to keep her steady, but his touch remained careful, functional, stripped of the intimacy that had once flowed between them without thought. 15 wolves flanked them, the force Ronan had brought south when Corvin's message reached Cathara. They moved in near silence through the darkness, their formations tight and alert. For the first hour, neither spoke. It was Soraya who broke the silence, and she did it because the question had been burning in her throat since the cottage. Calum, you said you dismissed him. I stripped him of his title and his chambers. He lives in the lower ward now, forbidden from council meetings. Why? Because he encouraged my worst instincts. Because he treated you as a political problem to be managed rather than a person to be respected. And because when I listened to his advice instead of my own heart, I lost everything that mattered. The selection was dead. Ronan had refused every candidate. Under the old laws, an alpha who refuses to mate can be declared unfit. The council appoints a regent. The Moravins, Soraya said, almost certainly. So the stakes were higher than personal grief. Kill Soraya, wait for Ronan to be declared unfit, install Valeria through the council rather than through a bond. They planned this, Soraya said. Not just the assassination. All of it. The pressure on you to select. The whisper campaign. The timeline pushing toward the solstice. Longer, Ronan said grimly. Corvin believes the Moravins began their campaign before you and I ever met. Valeria was always their candidate. I was always their target. You simply accelerated their timeline by making me impossible to control. The solstice is in 19 days. 19 days. To reach Cathara, face the noble houses, survive the Moravian conspiracy, and somehow establish legitimacy for a bond that had never been formally acknowledged. They reached the outskirts of Cathara late on the second day. Something was wrong. The farmlands were barren. Fields that should have been green with barley and wheat stood brown and withered, soil cracked as if the earth itself had given up. Livestock pens sat empty. Farmhouses showed dark windows. And above the city walls, where the Alpha's banner should have flown, the bronze wolf on deep green, a different standard snapped in the wind. Silver and black. The coiled serpent of House Moravian. Ronan's arm tightened around Soraya's waist. A growl built in his chest, vibrating against her spine. They have taken the capital, Corvin said, his voice flat with controlled fury. While we were in the south. A scout delivered the news. Lord Moravin had declared Ronan unfit under the old laws. The council had ratified it in an emergency session, 7 votes to 3. Valeria was named interim queen. 42 hostages held in the Great Hall, including the healer, Marta. Lord Morvenn has announced their execution at dawn, all 42 hostages. Soraya's breath stopped. Marta, the old healer who had trained her, who had noticed the morning sickness before Soraya herself had understood what it meant, who had pressed a bundle of ginger root into her hands and whispered, "Be careful, child. Kings are not kind to inconvenient truths." Marta, who had known about the pregnancy and never told a soul. "Ronan." Soraya's voice was steel. "We are getting her out. Soraya, you cannot go near that castle. If the Moravins capture you." Marta kept my secret. She protected me when no one else would. I will not leave her to die for her loyalty. "The old drainage channel beneath the eastern wall," Corvin suggested. "The Moravins will have fortified the gates but may not know about the channel." "I know about it," Soraya said. "I used to gather medicinal moss from the stones inside. It runs beneath the kitchens and opens into the cellars below the Great Hall." Ronan stared at her. "You never told me about that passage. You never asked about the places I went when I was not in your bed." The words were not meant as cruelty, but they landed with precision anyway. "It is narrow," she continued, addressing Corvin directly. "Too narrow for a shifted wolf, wet, dark, and difficult for someone in my condition. But it opens directly beneath the hall. You are not going through a drainage tunnel at 7 months pregnant," Ronan said flatly. "Then give me a better option." Silence. 15 wolves and perhaps 20 scattered loyalists, against the full Moravin garrison, 300 swords. 35 against 300. "The odds are not designed to be fair," Corvin said. "They are designed to be overcome." Ronan turned to his wolves. "The Moravins believe they have won. They sit in my hall, on my throne, with my people in chains. Tomorrow at dawn, they plan to execute 42 innocent people whose only crime was loyalty." He looked at Soraya. Something passed between them. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but a recognition that some things were larger than their broken history. "Tonight, we go through the drainage channel. We reach the Great Hall. We free the hostages." He paused. "Soraya will lead us through the passage because she is the only one who knows the way. I will not pretend I am comfortable with this. But I have spent 8 months making decisions for her without consulting her. That ends now." He extended his hand. Soraya looked at it for a long time. Then she took it. "For Marta. For the 42. For the kingdom you let rot while you kept me in the dark." "Show me the eastern approach," she said to Corvin. "We move in 2 hours." The water was black and freezing. Soraya lowered herself into the channel with Corvin's steadying hand on her arm. The tunnel stretched ahead into absolute darkness, a stone throat barely 5 feet high, slick with moss, carrying a shallow current that reached her shins. Ronan entered behind her, his massive frame forced into a crouch. Behind him came Corvin and 6 wolves in human form, each carrying a short blade. The remaining fighters waited above under Haddon's command for the gate diversion. Soraya moved by memory and touch, her fingers trailing along the wet stone wall. The air was thick with the smell of stagnant water and old earth. Every few steps, something unseen brushed against her ankles, roots, debris, things she chose not to identify. The babies were awake. She could feel them pressing against her ribs, restless with the cold and the tension that ran through her body like a wire pulled taut. She placed one hand on her belly and kept moving. "How far?" Ronan's voice was barely a breath behind her. "Another 100 yards. The tunnel branches at the old cistern. Left fork leads to the kitchens. Right fork runs beneath the Great Hall." They reached the cistern, a wider space where 3 tunnels converged around a stone basin filled with dark water. Soraya paused, listening. Through layers of stone and timber she could hear the faint vibration of movement, boots on flagstones, the murmur of voices, the garrison, awake and active despite the late hour. "They are nervous," Corvin observed quietly. "A confident occupying force would have minimal night watch. They know Ronan is coming. They just do not know when or how." The right fork narrowed further, forcing her to angle her body sideways to accommodate her belly. The stone pressed against her from both sides, cold and unyielding, and for a terrible moment she felt the walls closing in, the ancient fear of being crushed, of being swallowed by the earth with no way out. Ronan's hand found the small of her back, not pulling, not pushing, simply there, a point of warmth in the freezing dark. She hated how much it helped. 50 yards, 40, 30. The tunnel began to slope upward, and the distant vibrations resolved into distinct sounds. Voices, the scrape of furniture, the clank of chains. Chains. Soraya's jaw tightened. She reached the end of the tunnel, where a rusted iron grate covered the opening into the cellars beneath the great hall. Through the grate's crossbars, she could see torchlight flickering against stone walls. The cellar was large, lined with wine barrels and crates of provisions. A wooden staircase climbed to a heavy door at the far end, the door that opened into the great hall above. 2 Marivan guards stood at the base of the stairs, their swords drawn, their attention fixed on the door above rather than the forgotten drainage grate behind them. 2 guards, Soraya whispered. The stairs lead directly into the hall. Corvin eased the grate open inch by inch, the metal protesting in small, agonized squeaks that were swallowed by the ambient noise from above. When the gap was wide enough, he flowed through like smoke, Ronan close behind. The 2 guards never made a sound. Corvin listened at the door above. Approximately 40 voices, hostages chained in the center, Valeria giving orders. Marivan sounds celebratory. "I go through first, alone," Ronan said. "Corvin, bring the others up the eastern wall. When I howl, Haddon hits the gate. Soraya gets the hostages out. If something happens to me in there, Corvin will get you out. You and the children. That is the only order that matters. Nothing is going to happen to you, Ronan, because you owe me a debt that dying would not begin to repay, and I am not letting you off that easily." Something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile, but close. He turned toward the stairs and climbed. The door exploded open. Ronan walked through as a man, tall, unhurried, his boots striking stone with a cadence that echoed through the sudden silence. 42 hostages knelt in rows, wrists chained to iron rings driven into the floor. Blood-stained several of them. On the throne sat Valeria Moravan in ceremonial white and black. Lord Aldrin Moravan stood beside her. 30 armed guards lined the walls. "Ronan, we were told you had fled south." "I returned. I want my chair back." "The council has voted. You have been declared unfit." "You rule nothing. You sit on stolen wood and call it authority. You chained my people to my floor, in my hall, under my roof." His voice dropped to a register that made the torches flicker. "You sent assassins to murder a pregnant woman 60 miles from your border. Your operative Dacia is dead. Your hunting party is scattered. And I am standing in front of you very much sane, very much fit, and very much aware of exactly what your family has done." For the first time, something cracked in Valeria's composure. Her eyes darted to her father. Lord Moravan stepped forward, his hand resting on the pommel of his sword. "Bold words from a king without an army. I have 300 swords in this castle. You are going to need more." Ronan tilted his head back and howled. The sound shattered the stillness. The howl of an alpha, carrying harmonics that resonated in the bones of every wolf within a mile. The stones of the ancient hall vibrated with it. The chains on the hostages rattled. The torches bent sideways as if bowing. And from outside the castle walls, an answering chorus rose, Dozens of voices, then scores. Haddon and the Loyalists, joined by wolves from the surrounding countryside who had heard their alpha's call and could not resist the pull of it. The main gate shuddered under the first impact. Corvin and 6 wolves poured from the cellar doorway, and through the chaos, Soraya moved. She reached the first row of hostages and dropped beside an elderly woman whose wrists were raw and bleeding. "Marta," she whispered. "Soraya? Child? No time. Where are the keys?" The guard captain. Tall man. Scar across his chin. He was 15 feet away, his back to the hostages. Later, when the story was told and retold across the kingdom, this was the moment people argued about. Whether it was bravery or madness. Whether a woman 7 months pregnant with twins had any business approaching an armed soldier in the middle of a battle. Soraya did not think about bravery or madness. She thought about Marta's bleeding wrists. She thought about 42 people chained to a floor because they refused to betray their king. She thought about her children growing inside her, and the world she wanted them to inherit. She walked up and tapped the guard captain on the shoulder. He spun. His eyes registered a pregnant woman in a filthy dress, and confusion stalled his reflexes for 1 second. She yanked the key ring from his belt, the leather strap snapping under the force of her pull. When his hand seized her arm, the power bloomed. Not the devastating blast from the cottage. Something different. Controlled. A pulse of golden light that traveled up the captain's arm like a current of electricity. He jerked backward, his grip releasing, his face contorting with shock, as the energy disrupted every nerve in his body. He crumpled to the floor, conscious but unable to move. Soraya stared at her own hand. The light faded slowly, sinking back beneath her skin. The babies kicked. Both of them. Hard. No time to question it. She ran back and began unlocking chains. "Move. Cellar stairs. Down, then left. The tunnel takes you outside." They went, stumbling, weeping, and supporting each other. A stream of battered humanity. Marta was the last to be freed, and the old healer gripped Soraya's face between her hands before the shackles fell away. "You came back. You brave, magnificent girl. I came back for you. Now go." Ronan had shifted. The bronze wolf moved through the Morivan soldiers with devastating precision. Valeria had fled toward the rear exit. Lord Morivan stood his ground with a ceremonial blade. Ronan shifted back. "The council voted under duress, with forged evidence, while your assassins hunted my pregnant mate through the countryside." He looked at the assembled wolves. "I am Ronan, Alpha of Cathara, blood of the founding pack. And the woman who stands behind me, who walked through a drainage tunnel at 7 months pregnant to free 42 hostages, she is Soraya. She is the mother of my heirs. She is my true mate." His voice broke. "She is the bravest soul in this kingdom. Braver than a coward king who hid her in the shadows because he was afraid of what the world would think. I failed her. I took her love for granted. And when she left, this kingdom began to die. Because the bond between us is real, and you cannot sever a real bond without everything suffering. I am not asking her to forgive me. I am asking you to see her as the woman who came back to save your people when she had every right to let this kingdom burn." A Morivan guard, barely 19, dropped his sword. Another followed. Then a dozen, then 20, weapons cascading to the stone like rain. "This is not over," Lord Morivan hissed. "Yes," Corvin said, wrenching the sword from his hand. "It is." They found Valeria in the stables, attempting to saddle a horse with shaking hands. Corvin's wolves brought her back in chains. "Lord Aldrin Morivan," Ronan announced, "you are charged with conspiracy against the crown, unlawful seizure of power, and ordering the assassination of the Alpha's mate and unborn heirs. The evidence includes orders and correspondence recovered from your operative Dacia, intercepted communications between your house and agents in the border territories, and the testimony of 42 hostages chained to this floor under your orders. The sentence is exile, stripped of your titles, your lands, and your wolves, taken beyond the gray wall. Soraya sat in the healer's wing with Marta, letting the old woman examine her belly. Twins, both strong. The power you channeled has not harmed them. If anything, they are thriving. I did not know I could do what I did. The light, the energy. Healer's fire, Marta said. It manifests in healers who carry children conceived through a true mate bond. The children's power and the mother's gift fuse into something new. A true mate bond. There is no formal bond. He never claimed me. Child, a formal claiming is a ritual. What you and Ronan share is something the ritual was invented to describe. The bond exists whether he spoke the words or not. The land knows it. Your children know it. And what about what he called me? Marta's expression softened. He called you something unworthy of you. That is true. And he has spent 4 months learning exactly how wrong he was. She paused. Forgiveness is not a debt you owe him. But carrying the anger forever will poison you as surely as it has poisoned the land. It was evening when Ronan came to the healer's wing. He knocked. The Alpha King of Cathara, standing in his own castle, waiting for permission to enter. He entered in simple clothing, dark shirt, worn trousers, no crown. He looked like the man she had first met 2 years ago, when he had come with a dislocated shoulder and she had reset it while he bit down on a leather strap. Soraya, I came to ask you something, and whatever your answer is, I will accept it. He lowered himself to one knee, not the dramatic kneel of a ceremony, the slow, deliberate descent of a man placing himself below the woman he had wronged. I want to claim you, publicly, formally, before every wolf in Cathara, because you deserve to be chosen in the light by a man who says your name like it matters, because I should have done this 8 months ago. His voice cracked. But I will not do it unless you want it. If you want to leave, I will give you everything you need to raise our children safely wherever you choose. If you want to stay but not bond with me, you will have a title, full rights as the mother of the heirs, no shadows, no secret doors. And if you want me, not the king, not the alpha, but the fool who broke your heart, then I am yours, completely, publicly, for the rest of my life. She thought about the corridor, the casual certainty. She will forgive me. She always does. She thought about the drainage tunnel, the freezing water, the chains on the floor. She thought about 4 months of exile, the narrow bed in Brindal, and she thought about a bronze wolf pressing its nose to her belly with a sound that carried 4 months of anguish. I have one condition. You will never again assume my forgiveness. You will never take my patience as permission to disappoint me. And the next time you are tempted to call me a comfort, you will remember this moment. You on your knees, in a room that smells of healing herbs, and you will choose different words. I swear it. On what? On our children, on the bond, on every breath I take from this moment forward. She searched his face for the arrogance. She did not find it. What she found was a man broken down to his foundation, asking to be rebuilt by the only hands he trusted. Then claim me, and I will claim you back, and we will never speak of shadows and secret doors again. His hands cupped her face with a tenderness that trembled. Then his mouth found the place where her neck met her shoulder, and his teeth sank into her flesh. The bond ignited, not like fire, like dawn. A slow, immense illumination that poured through every corner of her being. She felt him, not just his presence, but his essence, every memory, every emotion, and every moment of the 4 months they had spent apart. She felt the morning he found her room empty, the crushed calendula petals sifting through his fingers, the sound that tore from his chest. Not a howl, not a scream, but something primal and shattered that emptied him of everything except the knowledge that he had destroyed the only thing that mattered. She felt the sleepless nights, the maps spread across every surface, the wolves sent to every corner of the kingdom, the desperate bargaining with a universe that refused to tell him where she had gone. And beneath all the grief and fury and self-recrimination, the love. Vast and terrified and imperfect, the love of a man who had not known what he had until the absence of it nearly killed him. Soraya tilted her head and bit down. He saw the corridor, heard his own voice through her ears, casual and cruel and catastrophically certain. Felt the bottom drop out of her world. Felt her hand on her belly, protecting a secret she had been moments from sharing. Felt the 3-mile walk through the frozen forest. The cold so deep it numbed everything except the pain. He saw the leaking roof, the narrow bed, the mornings spent with her hands on her swelling stomach, whispering promises to the children of a man who had called her a comfort. And he saw, with devastating clarity, what it had cost her. Not just the heartbreak, the erosion of trust itself, the death of the belief that love meant safety, the slow, painful reconstruction of a woman who had decided she would rather be alone and whole than together and invisible. When they released each other, they were both weeping. "I see you," he whispered. "Everything you carried, everything you survived." "No more shadows," she said. "No more shadows, no more secret doors, no more one more season. You in the light, beside me, for as long as you will have me." She kissed him then, slow and careful, and tasting of salt and healing herbs and the beginning of something that would take years to fully repair. But it was real, and it was in the light. And through the bond that now blazed between them, the land of Cathera shuddered and began, at last, to heal. In the weeks that followed, Cathara transformed. The first green shoots pushed through the cracked earth of the eastern provinces, barley and wheat stirring from dormancy, as if waking from a long and troubled sleep. The feral packs quieted overnight, their aggression dissolving as the completed bond radiated stability through the territory. The people met their queen with wariness and unexpected warmth. She was not what they had imagined, not a daughter of a noble house, but a healer with calloused hands and a direct gaze and a belly that announced the next generation with unmistakable clarity. And the story traveled. Not the dignified tale of a proper courtship, the real story, the healer who was hidden, the words spoken in arrogance, the woman who chose her own dignity over a king's convenience. The people loved it, not because it was romantic, but because it was honest. Soraya held no court. She returned to the healer's wing, working alongside Marta. "You are the queen," the wardrobe mistress protested. "You cannot receive ambassadors in an apron." "Watch me," Soraya replied. Ronan did not object. He did not make decisions for her, did not assume, and did not presume. When council meetings ran long, he came to find her afterward and told her what had been discussed. When noble houses sent envoys seeking audience with the new queen, he deferred to her schedule. When she was tired, he brought her tea. When she was restless, he walked with her through the gardens, matching her pace, filling the silence only when she invited him to. He was, Soraya reflected, learning. Slowly, imperfectly, with setbacks and missteps that she corrected with a bluntness he had earned. But learning. Slowly, imperfectly, with setbacks she corrected with a bluntness he had earned. But learning. The twins arrived on a night when summer storms rolled across the valley, lightning splitting the sky in forks of silver and gold. Marta delivered them in the royal chambers, with Ronan holding Soraya's hand so tightly that she later found bruises on her fingers. She did not mind. The pain of his grip was an anchor, something solid to hold on to while her body did the extraordinary, terrifying, magnificent work of bringing two new lives into the world. A boy first, dark-haired, copper-eyed, his cry splitting the room with a volume that made Marta laugh and Ronan go pale. Then a girl, smaller but fiercer, her tiny fists clenched, her eyes the exact shade of green Soraya saw in her own mirror. Ronan held his son with trembling hands. Then Marta placed his daughter in his other arm, and the Alpha King of Cathara, the man who had torn a kingdom apart and put it back together, the wolf who had smashed through a stone wall to reach the woman he loved, sat down on the edge of the bed and wept. "Thank you," he whispered. Soraya reached up and touched the claiming mark on his throat, the silver scar that matched her own. "Do not thank me," she said softly. "Deserve this. Every day, for the rest of my life." Outside the window, through the fading storm, the wolves of Cathara lifted their voices. Not a howl of war or warning, a howl of welcome, of completion, of a pack recognizing that its circle had widened and its future had arrived. And in the great tapestry hall, a new panel would soon take its place among the stories of kings and queens. It would show a woman walking through a castle gate at dawn, not through a hidden door, not through a servant's passage, but through the front gate, in the light, with her head held high. Beside her, a king. Behind her, a kingdom. And beneath her hand, pressed to the place where two heartbeats echoed her own, the future of a realm that had learned, at great and terrible cost, that the strongest bonds are not forged by politics or power. They are forged by the moment someone stops forgiving and starts demanding to be valued. And they hold forever. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story.